Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into big barley wine today. It's been a while on that front, and the brewer as well. I've had quite a few beers by them, but it has been quite a while. So this specific barley wine is brewed by the Alementary Brewing Company. They're based in Hackensack, New Jersey. The specific barley wine is called Figgy Pudding, and it clocks in at 9.1% ABV. They have aged this one specifically on figs, apricots, prunes, and dates. Now, if you know anything about barley wine, and if you've watched a lot of my barley wine reviews, aside from it being my favorite beer style, you'll know that there are commonalities in the vast majority of barley wines, and that is aromas and flavors of all of the fruit that they chose to age these on. So I will be very curious to see just how more pronounced those aromas and flavors are in the actual beer, and also if it adds any other underlying characteristics that I didn't anticipate. So this is going to be a fun one. A nice big bottle today. I will be sipping on this for hours at 9.1% ABV. The label art's pretty cool. Just says Figgy Pudding, and it's inside of kind of an atom design with neurons and electrons kind of on the spinning atom kind of design. Very cool. Nice silver foil on the font there. Let's get this cracked. All right. We're going to get this poured in our stout glass, which works quite well for barley wines. All right. Visually, this is looking very much classic barley wine, that caramelly brown color. This one, I was pretty aggressive, intentionally out of the gate to give it a chance to form a head here. Barley wines are all over the board. They don't typically form and hold the best heads overall because they do tend to be quite effervescent, much like a porter. But this one did a pretty good job. We'll see how long it sticks around. Yeah, visually, that is that classic caramelly color, little notes of orange and amber in there. Looks absolutely stunning. As you would expect on a barley wine, the aroma is quite pronounced. You can smell that from a good 1.5 to 2 feet away. Very, very pronounced aroma. We'll get right up on it here in just a minute. Yes, active in terms of carbonation. Mix of medium and small and a few little large bubbles kind of rising up. So we'll see how long that head sticks around, though I got to say, it did actually form a pretty tight, creamy pad there. So if it all collapses reasonably soon, we may still have a decent bit of cling and a little pad on the middle. But let's get right up on it for a proper sniff. Oh yeah. Wow. Okay. So aroma-wise, there is one surprise here, but it's not related to the dates, the figs, the prunes, or the apricots. Those aromas, I mean, you're more likely going to get than not some combination of those fruit aromas coming off of a barley wine. This is no exception. They aged it on them, and yes, you can smell that. But I think maybe having aged the beer on top of the actual fruit itself in the creation of this barley wine has imparted an interesting aroma, and it doesn't smell like I expected it to smell. This could be coming from the malt bill, but we'll probably get a little more clarity when we jump in. It actually does have a little bit of a coffee-like aroma to it. Not like a very strong brewed coffee. This would be mild and almost more like just starting to roast coffee beans or coffee cherries. It smells very intriguing. So it's got this rich, deep fruit layered aroma to it with this slight coffee aroma to it. And yes, there is a little bit of a caramelization, so it likely is coming from the malts. We'll see what aging it on the fruit actually makes impact-wise in the flavor profile. But it looks great, smells great, still got a little pad floating there as I kind of suspected I would. Let's just jump right in and see what this one's about. Ooh. Well, that is interesting. Okay, so this is a very unique barley wine. It is quite interesting in the flavor profile department. There is a lot of commonality that you would perhaps expect in a barley wine compared to standard barley wines. But yeah, that aroma that I was picking up is definitely translating into the flavor profile of this glass. Now, where that's coming from, I couldn't exactly tell you. But yes, there is both an aroma and a flavor of what is like just a mild cup of coffee. it does have this coffee-like profile to it. In terms of the other fruit, same thing that you got on the nose, it is translating into this glass. You're getting figs, you're getting apricots, you're getting prunes. Dates are probably where I might expect the aging process on top of them might have imparted this kind of coffee-like flavor and aroma to it, but it's very, very nice. Classic barley wine flavors here. One thing that is a little surprising about this one compared to other barley wines is, yes, there's a lot of flavor happening here and there's a lot of aroma, but the actual intensity of the flavor, sure, it's much more intense than your average beer style, but compared to many other barley wines I've had over the years, this one is a little more tame. It's a little dialed back. So people that are put off by very, very intense beers or barley wines in particular, maybe that's why they don't like them. They're just too big, too intense. This one's dialed back a bit. I would say it's maybe on par with the average kind of imperial stout kind of intensity of flavor here. It's not barrel aged. It's just aged on some fruit. So that would have made it even more intense. But yeah, very, very nice. A lot of complexity here in the flavor department, just as with the aroma department. And the underlying kind of classic either mix of toffee or caramel that you most often get in a barley wine, that is present here. In this one, it is mostly presenting itself as caramel notes, but there is this buttery sense like you normally get with toffee. It doesn't taste like toffee. It tastes like caramel, but it's almost like buttered caramel. So there is this real richness to this beer to go along with these deep, rich fruit. And that's one of the common traits with barley wines. And they do taste like big, just heavy desserts, like baked goods. They've got all these rich, deep fruit flavors and this buttery sense. And that is also present very much in this beer. Very, very nice. Now I'm going to jump back in, let these flavors re-intensify. Before I do, I was very, very in tune with the mouthfeel on this one. This one almost reminds me of the cream ale we just reviewed. Very, very silky, very, very creamy. It feels very lush and it almost takes on this thickness. It gets so fine and silky creamy. But we're going to jump back in. We're going to think on this body, let the flavors re-intensify, and we'll pick apart this finish. A very nice barley wine indeed. Body on this one is a solid medium, kind of starting to turn into the medium heavy territory. I would actually expect it to feel a little bit more hefty than that. It is a barley wine, but compared to most barley wines, this is a little bit on the lower end of the ABV range at 9.1. On second sip, the intensification of these flavors really becomes more pronounced. So it gets a lot more intense, and the actual fruit flavors from what they aged it on really pop a lot more. Most notably, the fig and the apricot. That is really coming out at me as a dominant flavor here. Most often you're going to get kind of a fig flavor profile in a barley wine, but it's even more pronounced because they aged it on it. I can also tell you that the underlying prune, that's another common flavor that you will get, or raisins or something like that. And again, having aged it on top of these fruit, it's really drawing out all of these deep, rich fruit flavors. The dates, again, I still think maybe that's where some of this coffee vibe I'm getting is coming from. On second sip, that coffee-like quality was not quite as prevalent and intense as it was on first sip, which is another surprising thing. It's almost like second sip intensification, the flavor profile reversed. So that coffee element is there, but very, very slight, but everything else about the fruit they aged it on really amplifies. Again, really specifically the apricot and the fig. That's coming through very, very clearly. Absolutely delicious. The caramel sense of the malt bill, very clear again here. And yes, that rich buttery sense about it as well. So this is another big, intense, flavor-forward, high ABV beer. It's a barley wine. There's really no punches pulled other than just interesting layering of flavors and the aroma profile. It's definitely unique in that department. And in terms of the finish, as you would expect with a barley wine, it's very full, it's very wet. all the way to the end. And yes, these flavors are intense, so it does have a longer than your average beer length on the finish. Compared to a standard barley wine, this one's definitely above average. It's not as long as you would find, say, on a barrel-aged equivalent, but certainly for the style and the ABV, it's quite pronounced. It's above average to be certain. And I think that really comes back to the fact that they did age it on those fruit. So overall, just a very delicious, very impressive, and kind of a unique barley wine in terms of both aroma and flavor. Still filled with that classic barley wine complexity. I am a big fan. I'm going to take my time, sip on this one, come up with my scores. When we come back, we'll get this beer ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. So this was the Alementary Brewing Company's Figgy Pudding, a barley wine clocking in at 9.1% ABV that was aged on figs, apricots, prunes, and dates. The Alementary Brewing Company is based in Hackensack, New Jersey. So starting with the aroma, as expected for a barley wine, and certainly one that's been aged on top of additional fruit, the aroma was extremely pungent, exactly as I expected. And there were a lot of underlying classic barley wine aromas that jumped out of this. All of the fruit on which they aged it are very, very common aromas you're going to get in a barley wine anyway. They were just a lot more pronounced. And this one also had this kind of interesting, almost coffee-like aroma to it, which was not expected, but it smelled very nice. Overall, the aroma does get a 10 out of 10. For the taste, overall, I enjoyed the taste on this beer. It did have quite a lot of layers to it, as you typically find in a barley wine. Really, for me, it came down to kind of how intense these underlying rich fruit flavors that you normally find in a barley wine anyway were. They really, really popped in, notably that fig and that apricot. There was a little bit of an underlying caramel note to it as well, which you often get, and it did have this slight buttery richness to it, but it didn't really have any kind of underlying toffee vibes. That's pretty commonplace. And really on this one, the truly interesting thing was kind of that coffee aroma note made its place in the flavor profile note as well. So overall, the grand scheme of things, very well done barley wine. For me, I'm not sure how necessary it was, particularly to age on all of those fruit that you normally get those notes just based on the malt bill anyway, but that's what they did, and it just intensified everything. Overall, I enjoyed the flavor. It was very complex, classic barley wine. It is well above average. The taste gets a 9 out of 10. For the body on this one, I was surprised. It's a barley wine, granted very much on the low end of the scale for a barley wine, only 9.1% ABV, but the body really didn't have the breadth that I was expecting at all. In the grand scheme of things, it was really just high end of average for the style in this ABV range. Body does get a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel on this was exactly right. The body may not have had the breadth I expected, but the mouthfeel felt like the mouthfeel on a barley wine, several ABV percentages above where it was. Classic barley wine, nice and creamy when you agitated. You could feel that carbonation, a lot of resistance. Mouthfeel does get a 10 out of 10. For the finish on this is certainly longer than average, for a non-barrel-aged barley wine. And I think on this one, it really came down to the intensification of the fruit on which they aged it. It was above average, but not top tier. The finish on this one does get a 7 out of 10. For the head and retention, barley wines are all over the board, but this one did an absolutely fantastic job. Formed a nice creamy head, stuck around the whole time. Head and retention does get a perfect 10 out of 10. For the appearance, this was textbook barley wine, that kind of caramelly color, which is exactly what you expect to see. They can run in a range, but this was textbook. Appearance does get a 10 out of 10. For the balance, I really enjoyed the balance on this beer. The malt bill that they chose, the fruits on which they aged it, whether or not I think it was necessary, it did make for a very unique barley wine drinking experience. And frankly, the amount of the specific fruit that they used really played well into the character of this beer. I think they nailed the balance. Balance does get a perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangible. Subjectively, I like this. I thought this was well above average barley wine, but part of what made this one so unique was really what detracted a little bit. And I don't want to kind of diminish how good this beer was, because it was really, really great. And a little bit different than your average barley wine because of how they aged it. But for me, these are flavors that are naturally going to come through in a barley wine anyway. And if you're going to throw in some additional stuff, why not try something that you don't normally find in a barley wine flavor profile? That said, it was quite nice. And in particular, I was particularly appreciative of the apricot coming through a lot more clearly than you typically get. Fig is very dominant in most barley wines. Apricot's normally subtle. It was quite pronounced on this one. And overall, I really like this beer. Do I think it was as good as many barley wines I've had? It's above average, but I wouldn't place it in the top tier category personally. Feeling in the intangible, it does get a 7 out of 10. Finally, is an example of the style. This was a very, very well done barley wine. It had a lot of classic elements, a little bit lower ABV than we typically see, and, you know, aged on these fruits. So that was kind of the thing about this beer. And calling it Figgy Pudding, that was a very appropriate namesake because it really did remind me of a figgy pudding. And the fruit on which they aged it obviously are a blend of fruit that you might find in a fig pudding. So very, very well done here. Lost a few points in a few categories, nothing too major, notably the body and a few points in a few others, but grand scheme of things, this is definitely above average. Example of the style gets a 9 out of 10. Which brings the total score on the Alementary Brewing Company's Figgy Pudding to an 88 out of 100. So if you're a fan of barley wines, maybe you don't drink them quite as often as you would like because the sky-high ABVs, this is one that's a little lower. This is sitting at, you know, Imperial IPA, Imperial Stout territory, several percentage points lower than your average barley wine, and was very, very tasty. The fruit on which they aged it really added a lot of depth and dimension and elements to this beer, and I am definitely a fan. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on the notifications, hit that bell icon. It is right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.